On the evening of February 2nd, 1980, Harvey Whipple pushed through the revolving doors of Harvey's Resort Hotel and Casino in State Line, Nevada. The 58-year-old bomb disposal expert had been called in from the San Francisco Police Department to handle what casino security described as a suspicious device. As he walked across the plush red carpet of the casino floor, past the ringing slot machines and crowded blackjack tables, Harvey had no idea he was about to face the most sophisticated explosive device anyone had ever seen in the United States. Earlier that day, casino employees had discovered a massive metal box in one of the hotel's utility rooms. It was roughly the size of an office desk, painted olive green and covered with warning labels that made everyone's blood run cold. One read, "Do not move or jar this bomb." The bomb is armed. Explosive charges set to detonate if you tamper with this device or attempt to move it. Do not use any radio transmitters within 1,000 yards. Another chilling message declared, "This bomb has the equivalent of 1,000 pounds of TNT and is set to go off if you don't pay $3 million. Harvey knelt beside the device, his flashlight casting eerie shadows across its surface. What he saw defied belief. This wasn't some crude pipe bomb assembled in someone's garage. The device was a masterpiece of engineering, featuring multiple detonation systems, anti-tampering mechanisms, and a level of sophistication that seemed almost impossible for a civilian to construct. The craftsmanship was so precise, so professional, that it raised an uncomfortable question. Who had the knowledge and resources to build something like this? As Harvey studied the bomb's intricate wiring and multiple trigger systems, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at government-level technology. The device incorporated techniques and components that were closely guarded secrets within the military and intelligence communities. It was as if someone with access to classified bomb-making knowledge had decided to terrorize a Nevada casino. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the bomb itself. It was what happened next. Because when investigators began digging into the case, they uncovered a web of connections that led straight to the shadowy world of federal law enforcement. Phone records, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies began painting a picture so shocking that it would challenge everything Americans believed about their own government's role in domestic terrorism. The story of the Harvey's casino bomb begins not with the device itself, but with a series of seemingly unrelated events that occurred throughout the late 1970s. During this period, federal law enforcement agencies were under intense pressure to demonstrate their effectiveness in combating domestic terrorism. The Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, and various anti-government groups had been carrying out attacks across the country, and the public was demanding results. At the same time, the FBI was dealing with a massive scandal. The Church Committee investigations had exposed decades of illegal surveillance, infiltration, and manipulation of American citizens. COINTELPRO, the Bureau's counterintelligence program, had been revealed as a systematic effort to disrupt and destroy political organizations through illegal means. The FBI's reputation was in tatters, and agents were desperate to prove their value to a skeptical Congress and an angry public. It was against this backdrop that a peculiar pattern began to emerge. Across the western United States, federal agents started appearing at the scenes of bombing incidents with suspicious frequency. They arrived quickly, sometimes before local law enforcement, and often seemed to have advanced knowledge of the attacks. In several cases, witnesses reported seeing federal agents in the vicinity of bomb sites before the explosions occurred. One particularly troubling incident took place in Reno, Nevada, just 6 months before the Harvey's casino bombing. A small explosive device detonated outside a federal courthouse, causing minor damage but no injuries. FBI agents arrived on the scene within minutes, which seemed impossible given their stated location at the time. When local police questioned how they had responded so quickly, the federal agents claimed they had been conducting routine surveillance in the area. The lead investigator on that case, Detective Maria Santos of the Reno Police Department, became suspicious when she noticed that several key pieces of evidence had gone missing from the FBI's evidence locker. When she pressed for answers, her superiors told her to drop the investigation and let the federal agents handle everything. Santos later told a local reporter that she believed someone with inside knowledge had been involved in planning the courthouse bombing. Similar incidents occurred in Sacramento, Phoenix, and Las Vegas itself. In each case, the pattern was the same. A bombing would occur, FBI agents would arrive unusually quickly, evidence would disappear, and local law enforcement would be told to step aside. The bombs themselves were always sophisticated devices that required advanced knowledge to construct, yet they invariably failed to cause significant casualties. This brings us back to Harvey Whipple, crouched beside the most complex explosive device he had ever encountered. As he examined the bomb's construction, Harvey noticed something that made his stomach drop. Several of the components appeared to be military-grade materials that were restricted to government agencies. The timing mechanisms were based on technology that was classified at the time, and the anti-tampering systems were so advanced that they seemed to come straight out of a federal training manual. Harvey had spent years working with explosives, and he recognized government handiwork when he saw it. But he also understood the implications of what he was thinking. If his suspicions were correct, it meant that federal agents were not just investigating domestic terrorism, they were creating it. The extortion note that accompanied the bomb provided another clue. The language was precise and technical, using terminology that suggested the author had extensive knowledge of law enforcement procedures. The demands were specific and detailed, indicating someone who understood exactly how federal agencies would respond to such a threat. Most telling of all, the note included references to classified information about casino security systems that should have been known only to federal investigators. As word of the bomb spread, Harvey's casino was evacuated and a perimeter was established around the building. Local law enforcement set up roadblocks and began interviewing witnesses, but their investigation was quickly overshadowed by the arrival of federal agents. Within hours of the bomb's discovery, FBI agents had taken control of the scene and begun restricting access to local investigators. The federal response was swift and overwhelming. Agents arrived from field offices across the western United States, bringing with them specialized equipment and expertise that seemed almost too perfectly suited to the situation. They established a command center, brought in bomb disposal robots, and began implementing procedures that suggested they had been preparing for exactly this type of incident. Detective Ray Morrison of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office was one of the first local investigators to arrive at the scene. He later described feeling like an outsider at his own crime scene, as federal agents seemed to know exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. When Morrison tried to examine the bomb himself, he was told that only federal personnel were authorized to handle the device due to its national security implications. The most disturbing aspect of the federal response was how prepared the agents seemed to be. They arrived with detailed floor plans of the casino, comprehensive lists of potential witnesses, and technical manuals that appeared to be specifically designed for dealing with this exact type of explosive device. It was as if they had been rehearsing for this moment, waiting for the call that would allow them to spring into action. As the hours passed and more federal agents arrived at the scene, a troubling picture began to emerge. Phone records would later show that several key FBI personnel had been in contact with each other in the days leading up to the bombing, discussing operational readiness and scenario implementation. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses captured federal vehicles in the area hours before the bomb was discovered, suggesting that agents had advanced knowledge of the device's location. The question that haunted everyone involved was simple but terrifying. How could federal agents be so perfectly prepared to handle a bombing unless they had been involved in planning it themselves? But the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the bomb's discovery, a former FBI explosives expert named Robert Chen walked into the offices of the Las Vegas Review-Journal with a story that would send shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Chen had recently retired from the bureau after 23 years of service, and what he told the newspaper reporters made their hands shake as they took notes. Chen claimed that in the months leading up to the Harvey's casino incident, he had been approached by his superiors about participating in what they called realistic training exercises. These exercises, he was told, were designed to test the readiness of local law enforcement agencies in handling domestic terrorism threats. The scenarios would involve placing sophisticated explosive devices in public locations and then monitoring how quickly and effectively local authorities could respond. According to Chen, the program was part of a broader initiative to rebuild the FBI's credibility following the COINTELPRO scandals. By demonstrating their expertise in handling terrorist threats, federal agents could prove their value to Congress and justify increased funding for counter-terrorism operations. The exercises were supposed to be controlled situations where no one would be hurt, but they would provide valuable intelligence about security vulnerabilities and response capabilities. Chen's story became even more disturbing when he revealed that he had personally helped design explosive devices for these training exercises. The bombs were intentionally complex and sophisticated, incorporating advanced anti-tampering mechanisms to make them appear as threatening as possible. The goal was to create scenarios that would challenge even experienced bomb disposal experts, forcing them to call in federal assistance. But Chen had grown uncomfortable with the program when he realized that local authorities were not being informed that the devices were part of training exercises. Police departments and sheriff's offices were responding to what they believed were genuine terrorist threats, putting officers and civilians at risk. When Chen raised these concerns with his supervisors, he was told that maintaining the illusion of real danger was essential to the program's effectiveness. The final straw for Chen came when he discovered that some of the training exercises had gone beyond simply placing inert devices. In at least 3 cases, he learned that small explosive charges had actually been detonated to create more realistic scenarios. These explosions had caused property damage and, in one case, minor injuries to a security guard who was too close to the blast. Chen realized that the line between training and actual terrorism had been crossed. When Chen tried to document his concerns and file a formal complaint, he found that records of the training program had been classified at the highest levels. His access to relevant files was revoked, and he was transferred to a desk job processing routine paperwork. Colleagues who had worked with him on the explosive devices suddenly refused to speak with him, and he began to suspect that his phone calls were being monitored. The breaking point came when Chen received what he interpreted as a veiled threat from a senior FBI official. During a meeting that was ostensibly about his retirement benefits, the official made several pointed references to Chen's family and their safety. The message was clear: keep quiet about the training program, or face consequences that extended beyond his career. Chen's revelations cast the Harvey's casino bombing in an entirely new light. If his account was accurate, it meant that the sophisticated device discovered at the casino was not the work of criminal extortionists, but rather part of a federal training exercise that had spiraled out of control. The $3 million ransom demand and the threatening messages were theatrical elements designed to make the scenario as realistic as possible. But if the Harvey's incident was indeed a training exercise, something had gone terribly wrong. The bomb had been discovered by casino employees rather than planted by federal agents in a controlled manner. The device's location in a utility room suggested that it had been placed covertly, without the knowledge of casino security. Most disturbing of all, the bomb appeared to be fully functional, capable of causing massive destruction if tampered with incorrectly. Detective Morrison began conducting his own investigation into Chen's claims. Despite pressure from federal agents to focus on other aspects of the case, Morrison had served in military intelligence before joining law enforcement, and he recognized the signs of a psychological operation gone wrong. The Harvey's casino bomb had all the hallmarks of what intelligence professionals called a false flag operation, designed to create fear and justify increased government power. Morrison's investigation led him to examine other suspicious bombing incidents across the western United States. In case after case, he found the same pattern: sophisticated devices that appeared to be the work of highly trained professionals, quick federal response times that defied explanation, and evidence that mysteriously disappeared from crime scenes. The bombs were always designed to look terrifying but rarely caused significant casualties, as if they were meant to frighten rather than kill. One particularly revealing case had occurred in Phoenix just 2 months before the Harvey's incident. A bomb had been discovered in the basement of a federal building, leading to a massive evacuation and media coverage. FBI agents had arrived on the scene within minutes and successfully disarmed the device, earning praise from local officials and news outlets. The agents were hailed as heroes who had prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. But Morrison's investigation revealed troubling inconsistencies in the Phoenix case. Security cameras showed that federal agents had entered the building hours before the bomb was supposedly discovered. Witness statements indicated that the agents seemed to know exactly where to look for the device, despite claims that it had been found by chance during a routine inspection. Most damning of all, the bomb's construction was nearly identical to training devices that Chen had helped design for the FBI's exercises. As Morrison pieced together the evidence, a pattern emerged that was both shocking and illogical. The FBI, desperate to rebuild its reputation and secure funding, had been staging terrorist incidents to demonstrate their importance and effectiveness. The operations were carefully planned to minimize actual danger while maximizing fear and media attention. Federal agents would plant sophisticated devices, discover them at the right moment, and then heroically defuse them, proving their value to skeptical politicians and citizens. The Harvey's casino incident represented the culmination of this program, featuring the most complex device yet created. But something had gone wrong with the operation's execution. The bomb had been discovered too early, before federal agents were in position to take credit for finding and disarming it. The casino's evacuation and the involvement of local law enforcement had turned what should have been a controlled exercise into a genuine crisis. Morrison's theory explained why federal agents had responded so quickly and seemed so well prepared. It explained the sophisticated nature of the device and its use of classified technology. Most importantly, it explained why the bomb had never actually exploded, despite multiple opportunities for the supposed terrorists to trigger it remotely. The detective's investigation had uncovered what he believed to be one of the most disturbing chapters in American law enforcement history. If his conclusions were correct, the FBI had not just been investigating domestic terrorism, they had been manufacturing it. The very agency charged with protecting American citizens from terrorist threats had been creating those threats to justify its own existence and expand its power. But Morrison's investigation was about to take an even darker turn. As he dug deeper into the federal response at Harvey's casino, he discovered that the FBI's involvement extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Phone records obtained through a local judge showed that key FBI personnel had been in contact with Harvey Gross, the casino's owner, for weeks before the bombing. The conversations, according to phone company logs, lasted for hours and occurred at unusual times, often late at night or early in the morning. When Morrison approached Gross about these calls, the casino owner's reaction was telling. Gross became visibly agitated, claiming he couldn't remember any conversations with federal agents before the bombing. His story changed multiple times during the interview, first saying he had never spoken to any FBI personnel, then admitting to brief conversations about general security matters, and finally refusing to discuss the topic altogether. Most suspicious of all, Gross seemed to know details about the bomb's construction that had not been released to the public. The detective's suspicions deepened when he learned that Harvey's casino had been struggling financially in the months leading up to the bombing. The resort was facing foreclosure on several loans, and Gross had been desperately seeking investors to keep the business afloat. Insurance investigators later revealed that the casino had recently increased its coverage for terrorist attacks, a highly unusual policy addition that raised red flags throughout the industry. Morrison began to wonder if Gross had been more than just an unwitting participant in a federal training exercise. The timing of the bomb discovery, the casino owner's strange behavior, and the convenient insurance policies suggested a more complex conspiracy. Perhaps Gross had agreed to participate in the FBI's operation in exchange for federal assistance with his financial problems. Or maybe he had been blackmailed into cooperation through threats of tax investigations or regulatory action. The detective's theory gained credibility when he discovered that several other businesses targeted in suspicious bombing incidents had also been facing financial difficulties. A pattern emerged of struggling companies that suddenly found themselves at the center of federal terrorism investigations, only to receive mysterious influxes of capital shortly afterward. It appeared that the FBI's training exercises were serving multiple purposes, providing both propaganda victories and opportunities to reward cooperative business owners. Morrison's investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of the operation. Medical records from local hospitals showed that several federal agents had sought treatment for injuries consistent with handling explosive materials in the days following bombing incidents. The injuries were minor burns and cuts that suggested direct contact with the devices, yet the agents had claimed to have maintained safe distances during all operations. This evidence supported Chen's assertion that federal personnel were not just investigating the bombs, but actively constructing and placing them. The detective also uncovered financial irregularities in the FBI's budget allocations for the Western region. Large sums of money had been transferred to classified operations accounts in the months leading up to each bombing incident. These transfers coincided perfectly with the timeline of the alleged training exercises, suggesting that significant resources were being devoted to the program. Congressional budget documents showed that the FBI had requested massive increases in counter-terrorism funding, citing the growing threat of domestic extremists as justification. As Morrison compiled his evidence, he began receiving pressure from unexpected sources to abandon his investigation. His own department's leadership, which had initially supported his work, suddenly became reluctant to provide resources or personnel for the case. Phone calls from federal officials to the sheriff became more frequent, and Morrison noticed that his access to certain databases and records was being restricted without explanation. The detective's personal life also began to suffer under mysterious circumstances. His car was broken into twice in a single week, though nothing was stolen. His home phone started experiencing strange clicking sounds and periodic disconnections during sensitive conversations. Most unsettling of all, Morrison began noticing the same unfamiliar faces appearing in different locations around town, always seeming to watch him from a distance. Despite the mounting pressure, Morrison pressed forward with his investigation, driven by a growing conviction that he had uncovered something of national importance. He began secretly documenting his findings and making copies of all evidence, storing them in multiple secure locations. The detective understood that his discoveries could expose one of the most significant government conspiracies in American history, and he was determined to see the truth revealed. Morrison's breakthrough came when he managed to track down other federal employees who had worked on the training exercise program. Through careful questioning and promises of anonymity, he learned that the operation had a code name within the FBI: Project Candle Flame. According to his sources, the project had been approved at the highest levels of the Bureau and was considered essential to rebuilding public confidence in federal law enforcement capabilities. The sources revealed that Project Candle Flame had been active for over 2 years, staging incidents across multiple states. Each operation followed a similar pattern. Federal agents would identify a suitable target location, often a business facing financial difficulties, or a building with symbolic significance. They would then construct a sophisticated explosive device designed to look threatening, but remain under their complete control. The devices were placed by undercover agents who posed as maintenance workers, delivery personnel, or other service providers. Local law enforcement was never informed of the operations, maintaining the illusion that genuine terrorist threats were being discovered and neutralized by alert federal agents. The media coverage of these successful interventions helped restore public faith in the FBI's competence and justified increased funding for counterterrorism programs. But Project Candle Flame had a darker side that even some participating agents found disturbing. Morrison learned that the program included psychological operations designed to influence public opinion and political decision-making. The timing of bombing incidents was carefully coordinated with congressional budget hearings and legislative debates about law enforcement funding. Fear generated by the fake terrorist threats was being used to manipulate the democratic process and expand federal power. The Harvey's Casino incident represented the program's most ambitious operation, featuring a device so sophisticated that it could serve as a demonstration of the FBI's technical capabilities. The plan had called for federal agents to discover the bomb during a routine security sweep, allowing them to showcase their expertise in front of media representatives who had been tipped off about the training exercise. The casino's evacuation was supposed to provide dramatic footage that would dominate news coverage for days. Instead, the operation had gone catastrophically wrong when casino employees stumbled upon the device before federal agents were in position. The bomb's discovery by civilians had forced the FBI to improvise, leading to the chaotic response that Morrison had witnessed. Agents had been scrambling to regain control of the situation while maintaining the fiction that they were responding to a genuine terrorist threat. Morrison realized that Harvey Whipple, the bomb disposal expert from San Francisco, had been brought in specifically because he was not part of the FBI's operation. The Bureau needed an independent expert to examine the device and provide credible testimony about its sophistication, lending authenticity to their claims about the terrorist threat. Whipple's genuine shock and professional assessment of the bomb's complexity had been exactly what the FBI needed to sell their story to the public. The detective's investigation also revealed the fate of the supposed extortionists who had demanded $3 million from the casino. Despite massive federal resources devoted to the case, no arrests were ever made and no credible suspects were identified. This failure, which had puzzled law enforcement observers at the time, now made perfect sense. The FBI couldn't arrest the extortionists because there were no extortionists to arrest. The ransom demands had been part of the theatrical elements designed to make Project Candle Flame's scenarios as realistic as possible. Morrison's discoveries painted a picture of a federal agency so desperate to prove its relevance that it had resorted to manufacturing the very threats it claimed to protect against. The implications were staggering, suggesting that American citizens had been terrorized by their own government in service of bureaucratic self-interest and political manipulation. As the detective prepared to present his findings to higher authorities, he faced a crucial decision about how to proceed. He knew that exposing Project Candle Flame would likely destroy his career and potentially put his life in danger. But he also understood that remaining silent would allow the FBI to continue its campaign of manufactured terrorism, potentially leading to even more dangerous operations in the future. The truth about the Harvey's casino bombing was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. What had appeared to be a sophisticated terrorist attack was actually evidence of a government conspiracy that struck at the heart of American democracy. The very institutions charged with protecting citizens from threats had become the source of those threats, using fear as a tool to expand their power and influence. Morrison knew that his investigation had uncovered only the tip of the iceberg. Project Candle Flame was likely just one of many covert operations designed to manipulate public opinion and justify increased government authority. The question now was whether anyone in positions of power would have the courage to confront the truth and hold those responsible accountable for their actions. The detective understood that revealing his findings would require extraordinary evidence and unshakable proof. The FBI had covered its tracks carefully, and any attempt to expose the conspiracy would be met with fierce resistance from powerful interests. But Morrison also knew that the American people deserved to know the truth about what their government had been doing in their name. As he sat in his office late one evening, reviewing the mountain of evidence he had assembled, Morrison made his decision. The truth was too important to remain hidden, regardless of the personal cost. He would find a way to expose Project Candleflame and ensure that the victims of the FBI's manufactured terrorism received the justice they deserved. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy and identify all the players involved in this elaborate deception. Morrison's quest for answers led him to a former federal prosecutor named Catherine Wells, who had worked on domestic terrorism cases throughout the late 1970s. Wells had left the Justice Department abruptly in 1979, citing personal reasons, but Morrison suspected there was more to her departure. When he tracked her down to a small law practice in Carson City, Nevada, Wells initially refused to discuss her federal career. However, something in Morrison's presentation of evidence seemed to strike a chord. After several tense meetings, Wells finally revealed why she had really left the Justice Department. In the months before her resignation, she'd been assigned to review case files for domestic terrorism prosecutions that never seemed to materialize. Time after time, sophisticated bombing incidents would generate massive federal investigations, consume enormous resources, and produce detailed forensic reports, only to result in closed cases with no arrests or prosecutions. Wells had grown suspicious when she noticed that the evidence in these cases always seemed to point toward perpetrators with impossible skill sets. The bombs were too advanced for typical domestic extremists, yet too crude for foreign intelligence services. The extortion demands were simultaneously amateur and professional, written in language that suggested both desperation and careful planning. Most puzzling of all, the timing of these incidents invariably coincided with congressional budget hearings for law enforcement agencies. When Wells had pressed her superiors for explanations, she was told that the cases involved sensitive national security matters that were beyond her clearance level. But her legal training had taught her to recognize patterns, and the pattern she saw suggested something far more sinister than failed investigations. The evidence pointed to a systematic program of manufactured threats designed to justify increased federal power and funding. Wells' breaking point had come when she discovered a classified memo discussing the operational benefits of unsolved terrorism cases. The document, which she had accessed accidentally while researching an unrelated matter, outlined how fear of domestic threats could be used to overcome congressional resistance to expanded surveillance powers and increased agency budgets. The memo specifically mentioned the value of sophisticated attacks that demonstrated the inadequacy of local law enforcement while showcasing federal expertise. The former prosecutor had tried to investigate further, but her access to relevant files was quickly restricted. Colleagues who had previously shared information with her became evasive and uncooperative. Her own supervisor began assigning her to routine cases that kept her away from terrorism-related matters. When she persisted in asking questions, she received a performance review that questioned her judgment and loyalty to the department. Wells told Morrison that her final weeks at the Justice Department had been marked by escalating pressure to abandon her inquiries. She received anonymous phone calls warning her about the dangers of pursuing matters beyond her understanding. Her apartment was burglarized twice, though nothing valuable was taken. Most disturbing of all, she began finding subtle signs that someone had been searching through her personal files and legal documents. The decision to resign had been made after Wells discovered that her phones were being tapped and her movements monitored. She realized that her own government viewed her as a threat simply because she had asked inconvenient questions about inconsistencies in terrorism cases. Rather than face potential criminal charges, or worse, she had quietly left federal service and tried to rebuild her career in private practice. The Harvey's casino bombing of 1980 stands as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threats to American freedom come not from foreign enemies or domestic extremists, but from the very institutions we trust to protect us. Detective Morrison's investigation revealed a web of deception that stretched from local casinos to the highest levels of federal law enforcement, where fear was manufactured and democracy was manipulated in service of bureaucratic power. While Project Candleflame may have been shut down decades ago, the questions it raises about government accountability and the use of manufactured crises to expand federal authority remain as relevant today as they were in 1980. The sophisticated device that Harvey Whipple examined that February night wasn't just a bomb. It was a symbol of how easily our own government can become the source of the very threats it claims to protect us from. The truth about Harvey's casino forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. In a world where information is classified and operations are compartmentalized, how can we ever be certain that the next terrorist threat isn't being orchestrated by the same agencies we've empowered to keep us safe?